A 9-year-old girl stood at a window for 279 days mouthing 3 words through the glass. Call 911. Dozens of people came to that porch. Delivery drivers, mailmen, neighbors. Every single one of them looked at the ground, the door, their phones. Not one of them looked up. Not one until a broken-down biker with nothing left to lose delivered a pizza to the wrong house on the wrong day and read her lips. This is that story. The system had 9 chances to save her. 9 complaints from neighbors who heard crying through the walls. 9 times a caseworker logged the report, checked a box, and closed the file without ever stepping through the door, without ever looking through the window. For 279 days, a 9-year-old girl stood at that window. Same window, same filthy curtain, same 3 words shaped by lips that had forgotten how to make sound. Call 911. Delivery drivers looked at the ground. The mailman looked at the door. The woman from next door looked sideways, then looked away. Everyone looked somewhere. No one looked up. No one except a man who had nothing left to lose. But this story does not begin with him. This story begins with a girl named Wren and a window she refused to leave. The glass was cold against her fingertips. Late March cold, the kind of cold that seeps through single-pane windows in old Texas houses where landlords never bothered with insulation because summers were the problem, not springs. But Wren Ashford had stopped feeling temperature months ago. Cold was just another word for the world outside the room. And the world outside the room had stopped being real somewhere around day 100. She pressed her forehead against the glass, breathed out slow. Watched the fog bloom across the surface, a small white cloud that lived for exactly 3 seconds before it shrank back to nothing. In those 3 seconds, she dragged her fingertip through the mist. H-E-L, gone. She breathed again. Another cloud. Another 3 seconds. P-M-E, gone. Again. O-U-T, help me out. The words vanished like they always did, like they'd vanished every day for 260 days. She'd done the math. Wren was good at math. It was the only subject Russell still allowed her to study because numbers kept her quiet, and quiet was what Russell required. She pulled back from the glass and looked at the wall behind her bed. 260 lines scratched into plaster with the edge of a penny she'd found between the floorboards on day 16. The lines ran in groups of 5, 4 vertical, 1 diagonal. Neat, organized. The only thing in Wren Ashford's life that she controlled. She reached up and scratched line 261. Then she whispered the words she whispered every morning. Not to God, not to anyone listening. Just to herself because the sound of her own voice was the only proof she existed. Somebody will see me. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what happened before. You have to understand the girl Wren was before the room, before the locked door and the covered windows, before the counting. Wren Ashford was born in Pine Ridge, Texas in 2011. Population 23,000. 3 traffic lights, 2 churches, 1 high school, where the football team hadn't won state since '87, but people still talked about it like it happened yesterday. The kind of town where folks waved from pickup trucks and asked about your mother's surgery at the hardware store. Her mother was Nora Ashford. Brown hair, steady hands, the kind of laugh that made strangers smile without knowing why. Nora worked the front desk at Pine Ridge Family Clinic, knew half the town by first name, and raised Wren alone after Wren's father left when she was still in diapers. No forwarding address, no birthday cards, just a name on a birth certificate and a gap where a parent should have been. But Nora filled that gap so completely that Wren never felt it, not once. Their apartment above the hardware store on Clover Street was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, where Nora taped Wren's drawings to the refrigerator until the door was so covered you couldn't find the handle. Friday nights were movie nights, a blanket fort in the living room, and buttered popcorn, and whatever animated film Wren had picked from the library that week. Saturday mornings were pancake mornings, Nora singing off-key, while Wren measured flour with the precision of a chemist, because even at 7 she believed exact measurements mattered. Wren was bright, not the kind of bright that teachers brag about at conferences, the kind of bright that watches. She noticed things, the way Mr. Alderman at the grocery store limped worse on rainy days, the way Mrs. Purcell's dog barked 3 times fast when strangers came, but only twice when it was someone he knew. The way her mother's smile changed got tighter at the corners when she talked to the man from the bank. Wren watched people the way some children watch birds, carefully, constantly, learning their patterns, their tells, their truths beneath their faces. She didn't know it yet, but this skill, this relentless observation would one day save her life. Then Russell Graves walked into the clinic. He came in with a cough and a smile. June of 2018. 44 years old, clean-shaven blue eyes that held yours just long enough to make you feel important. Deputy District Attorney for the county. The kind of man whose name appeared in the Pine Ridge Gazette under headlines like "Local Prosecutor Fights for Families." The kind of man who coached Little League and organized charity drives and remembered the names of everyone's children. The kind of man who made juries trust him and judges respect him and neighbors wave at him and caseworkers close files for him. Nora didn't stand a chance. They married in November of 2018. Small ceremony, Pine Ridge Community Church. Wren was 7. She wore a white dress and held flowers and watched her mother say, "I do," with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. And Wren wanted to be happy. She tried to be happy. But something about Russell Graves made her skin feel wrong. Not a big something, not the kind of something a 7-year-old could put into words. Just a feeling. The way his hand rested on her shoulder. Too heavy, too long. The way his eyes watched her when he thought no one was looking. Not the way adults look at children. The way a man studies a lock before deciding whether to pick it. But Wren was 7. And 7-year-olds don't have the vocabulary for what their instincts scream. So she smiled and called him Mr. Russell and tried to make him love her because that's what children do. They try him. 7 months later, Nora was dead. Single vehicle accident. June 15th, 2019. Wet road after a summer storm, a curve on Route 12 that locals knew to take slow. Nora didn't take it slow, or so the report said. The investigation lasted 4 days. Russell played the grieving widower with the precision of a man who had rehearsed the role. Casseroles filled the freezer. Sympathy cards piled on the mantel. He stood at the church podium and delivered a eulogy so moving that 3 people who barely knew Nora wept openly. Wren stood at her mother's grave and watched dirt fall on the casket and felt something inside her go very quiet. Not sin, not angry. Quiet, like a pilot light clicking off in a furnace. The warmth didn't disappear all at once. It faded over days, then weeks, then was simply gone. She asked Russell once, 2 weeks after the funeral, if she could keep one of her mother's sweaters. The blue one that still smelled like lavender and the clinic's antibacterial soap. Russell threw it away while she was sleeping. When she asked where it went, he smiled and said, "We need to move forward, Wren, not backward." She never asked for anything again. 3 weeks after the funeral, Russell moved them to 34 Elmwood Drive. Bigger house, nicer neighborhood. A second floor with a bedroom that had a window facing the street. Wren's bedroom. He installed the lock on July 1st, outside the door. Wren heard the drill at 7 in the morning, lay in bed listening to the grinding of metal into wood, and understood with the clarity of a child who watches everything that her life had just changed. The lock clicked for the first time at 8:14 a.m. She didn't scream, didn't bang on the door, didn't cry. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the window and began to count. Day 1, but Russell's system was built on 2 things, patience and paperwork. Within the first week, he'd filed documentation with the school district declaring Wren medically vulnerable, immune compromised, requiring homebound education. Within 2 weeks, he'd submitted disability forms to Social Security, citing a fabricated autoimmune condition. Within a month, the checks started coming. Survivor benefits for Nora's death, disability payments for Wren's condition, state assistance for special needs caregiving, $5,300 a month for keeping a girl in a room. But the money was secondary. What Russell Graves really wanted was something money couldn't buy. Control. Complete, uninterrupted, absolute dominion over another human being. The door stayed locked. The curtains stayed drawn. The television in the corner played without sound because Russell said noise attracted attention, and attention attracted questions, and questions were dangerous. Wren ate what he brought her, slept when the light went off, existed in a space 12 feet by 14 feet that smelled like dust and old carpet and the particular staleness of air that never moves. And she counted. But Wren Ashford was not a passive girl. She was a girl who watched. By day 30, she had memorized Russell's schedule. When he left for work, when he came home, when he climbed the stairs. The weight of his footsteps told her his mood. Heavy meant anger. Light meant indifference. Silence meant danger because silence meant he was standing outside the door deciding something, and the things Russell decided in silence were never good. By day 60, she had taught herself to read lips. The television played news anchors and talk show hosts and weathermen who moved their mouths in patterns. Wren studied the way scholars study ancient languages. She couldn't hear them, but she could see them, and seeing for Wren had always been enough. She practiced on Russell when he came to bring food, watching his mouth move, while he told her lies about the outside world, matching the shapes of his lips to the sounds she could hear, building a vocabulary of motion that translated silence into meaning. By day 90, she had developed her signal system, 3 layers designed for anyone who might pass by the window. Layer 1, mouth the words, slow, deliberate, exaggerated lip movements. Call, 911, repeat, repeat, repeat. Layer 2, finger tap, right hand waves if Russell is watching. Left hand hidden at her side taps the digits against her thigh. 911, over and over, a code broadcast on a frequency only the attentive would catch. Layer 3, the glass, breathe, write, watch the letters disappear. Breathe again, write again, help me out. 3 words that lived for 3 seconds and died and were reborn and died again, hundreds of times, thousands of times, a message in a bottle that evaporated before anyone could read it. Every time she heard a vehicle stop outside, she went to the window, pulled the curtain aside just enough, stood at the glass and performed all 3 layers simultaneously. Mouth moving, fingers tapping, breath fogging. The mailman came 6 times a week. He looked at the mailbox. He looked at the door. He never looked up. A FedEx driver came twice, dropped packages on the porch, checked his phone, drove away. A woman from next door walked past once with a small dog. The dog stopped at the edge of the yard, pulled toward the house, whined. The woman tugged the leash and kept walking. Animals know things. People choose not to. Delivery drivers came. 8 different people over the months. Each one stood on the cracked porch of 34 Elmwood Drive, set down food Russell ordered and left. Their eyes went to the doorbell, to the welcome mat, to the cracked concrete under their feet, to their phones checking the next delivery, calculating the tip, moving on. Not one of them looked up at the second-floor window where a 9-year-old girl was screaming without sound. Wren counted them all, tallied them in her memory. Delivery driver 1, day 43. Male young headphones, didn't look up. Delivery driver 2, day 71. Female red jacket, didn't look up. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Didn't look up. Didn't look up. Didn't look up. Each failure carved something out of her. Not hope exactly, more like the expectation that hope could be justified. There's a difference between hoping someone will come and believing someone will come. Wren kept hoping. She stopped believing somewhere around day 200. But she kept standing at that window every single time. Because what else was there? Then the world broke open, and Russell Graves got exactly what he needed. March of 2020. The virus. The names and the numbers and the fur rolling across the country like a shadow with no edges. Pine Ridge buried its first resident on March 14th, then 5 more by the end of the week. Schools closed, churches closed. The clinic where Nora used to work converted to emergency overflow. Refrigerated trucks parked behind the hospital, and doors locked everywhere. Stay home, stay safe, social distancing, flatten the curve. The phrases entered the language like unwanted guests and refused to leave. And for predators like Russell Graves, the pandemic was the gift of a lifetime. No teachers watching, no church volunteers noticing, no social workers visiting. Just closed doors and stay-at-home orders in a society so terrified of one threat that it couldn't see the others growing in the shadows. Here's what the death counts in press conferences and hospital capacity charts failed to mention. The children had disappeared. Not physically, they were still there behind closed doors and shuttered windows. Millions of them stuck at home with parents who were stressed, terrified, drunk, violent, or some combination of all five. But nobody could see them anymore. Schools closed meant teachers couldn't spot bruises. Churches closed meant youth pastors couldn't notice the kids who flinched at loud voices. Pediatricians doing telehealth couldn't see what clothing covered. Calls to abuse hotlines dropped 40% in the first 2 months of lockdown. One newspaper called it a silver lining, family time reducing child abuse. The people who actually worked in child protection knew the truth. The abuse hadn't decreased. The witnesses had disappeared. Before the lockdowns, neighbors had noticed things. The little girl who used to play in the yard at the old apartment had vanished, crying through walls that should have been too thick for sound but weren't. A child's face appearing briefly in an upstairs window, then disappearing like a ghost. 9 complaints were filed with Child Protective Services about 34 Elmwood Drive. 9 times neighbors called the hotline. 9 times they said something was wrong. 9 times they described what they'd seen, what they'd heard, what they feared. 9 times the complaint was logged, reviewed, and closed. Margaret Holt, CPS District Director, had been Russell's classmate at UT Law. She owed him favors. He'd helped bury a scandal involving misallocated funds, and in return, certain cases went exactly where he wanted them. Each complaint about Elmwood Drive landed on her desk and died there. Pandemic protocols. Home visit not possible. Homeowner provides documentation of medical necessity for isolation. No evidence of imminent danger. 9 complaints, 9 chances. 9 times the system chose paperwork over a child. And upstairs, behind a dirty curtain, Wren Ashford scratched another line into the wall and whispered her daily prayer to no one. Somebody will see me. Day 261. Late March wind cutting between the houses on Elmwood Drive. The sound of a car engine cutting off somewhere in front of the house. Wren moved without thinking. Months of conditioning. Vehicle stops. Go to window. Pull curtain. Stand at glass. Begin signals. She pressed her face against the cold pane and looked down at the porch. A man stood on the cracked concrete. Late 40s, maybe 50, but not like any delivery driver she'd seen before. He was massive, broad shoulders that strained against a sleeveless, black leather vest covered in patches. A red emblem on the chest. No shirt underneath, just skin and ink. Both arms sleeved in dense, dark tattoos, tribal patterns. Celtic knots, the kind of artwork that takes years and pain to accumulate. His hair was dark gray, shaved on the sides, slicked back on top. A beard thick and white-gray hung to his chest. His hands were large and scarred and moved with the unhurried certainty of a man who had used them for things more serious than carrying pizza boxes. He looked like something from a different century. A Viking lost in a suburb. A warrior delivering pizza in a dented Honda Civic. He set the box on the weathered welcome mat, pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. Contactless delivery. No tip. Another order completed. $7.23 for 40 minutes of his life. Wren's mouth began to move. Call 911. Call 911. The man turned to leave. One boot on the porch step, hand gripping the rusted railing. Then he stopped. He looked up. Wren's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she felt it in her teeth. In 261 days and dozens of attempts, no one had ever looked up. Not once. Not a single pair of eyes had traveled from the porch to the second-floor window where she stood. But this man did. This massive, tattooed, bearded stranger lifted his head and looked directly at her. Their eyes locked through dirty glass. His were dark, deep-set, carrying the weight of something Wren recognized because she carried it herself. Loss. He wore it the way she wore hers. Not on the surface, but underneath where it colored everything. For one impossible second, they saw each other. Really saw each other. Not the way people look at houses or windows or curtains. The way two people trapped in separate rooms recognize in each other the same silence. Wren's mouth kept moving. Call 911. Call 9. A shadow rose behind her. Tall, male, moving with the deliberate slowness of a man who owned every second of time in this room. Russell's hand descended onto her shoulder. Large fingers pressing into the fabric of the nightgown she'd worn for a week. The kind of pressure that leaves bruises without leaving marks. Her mouth stopped. Her eyes went wide, then empty. The curtain jerked shut. Gone. On the porch, the man stood frozen. One boot down, hand white-knuckled on the railing. Something had crossed his face in that half-second before the curtain fell. Something Wren didn't have a name for yet. Recognition. She heard him leave, heard the car door open and close, heard the engine start and fade. And then she did something she hadn't done since day one. She went to the wall, to the neat rows of scratches that documented her imprisonment. And next to line 261, she scratched two words with the edge of her penny. He saw. The man who looked up at the window of 34 Elmwood Drive was Dalton Skaggs. The name meant nothing to Wren. It meant nothing to Pine Ridge. But just weeks ago, 270 men across 4 states knew it as Hammer. And those men would have ridden through fire for the voice that answered to it. Dalton Hammer Skaggs had been president of the Steel Legion Motorcycle Club, a multi-state organization with chapters in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and New Mexico. He'd built it from a single chapter of 20 riders into an army of brothers bound by chrome and loyalty, and a code that said you didn't hurt women, you didn't hurt children, and you protected your own, even when your own made it hard. He was born in Levick, Texas in 1972, to a mother who loved heroin more than him, and a father whose name never appeared on any birth certificate. By 6, he was in the system. By 8, 3 foster homes. By 10, he'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted, that the world divided into predators and prey, and that the only person who would ever protect Dalton Skaggs was Dalton Skaggs. His 4th foster home was the worst. The Hendersons looked good on paper. Church-going, middle-class, 3 biological children, and a heart for helping the less fortunate. They collected foster kids like stamps, maximizing the checks while minimizing the care. Dalton was 11 when he learned to read lips. The Hendersons had rules. Children were to be seen and not heard. Speaking above a whisper meant punishment, and the particulars of that punishment were never discussed in front of caseworkers. So Dalton watched mouths, learned to understand conversations across rooms through windows on muted televisions. A survival skill, like sleeping with one eye open, like knowing which floorboards creaked and which cabinet hinges squealed. He ran away at 12, got caught, ran again at 13, got caught again. At 15, deemed unadoptable, warehoused in a group home until he aged out. That's where the motorcycle club found him. Not the Steel Legion, yet just local riders who hung around a diner where Dalton washed dishes for cash under the table. They saw something in him, the hardness, the hunger, the refusal to become a victim ever again. By 18, first bike. By 20, first patch. By 25, sergeant at arms of the Austin chapter. He did 3 years in Huntsville for aggravated assault. Bar fight gone wrong, prosecutor who wanted an example. In Huntsville, speaking above a whisper meant getting your teeth knocked down your throat, so the lip-reading skill that had kept him alive in the Henderson house kept him alive in a cage too. He came out harder, smarter, more patient. By 30, vice president. By 33, president. He built the Steel Legion from a single chapter into something that mattered. They weren't angels. They ran security for businesses that couldn't go to the police, did things that kept lawyers employed and accountants busy. But they had a code. You didn't hurt women. You didn't hurt children. You protected your community. And Dalton believed in that code with the fervor of a man who had never been protected as a child. Then Jolene. He met her at a charity ride, one of those events where bikers played teddy bears for a day raising money for children's hospitals. She was a nurse. Brown hair, green eyes, a smile that made his stomach flip in ways it hadn't since adolescence. She wasn't afraid of him. Everyone was afraid of him, but Jolene looked at him like she could see through the leather and the tattoos and the scars to something underneath that was still worth reaching. They married in 2011. Colby came in 2012. And for 7 years, Dalton Skaggs, the unadoptable kid, the convicted felon, the motorcycle club president, lived a life he'd never dared imagine. Colby was the kind of child who made the world seem worth the trouble it took to live in it. Green eyes like her mother, stubborn chin like her father. A laugh that sounded like bells in a windstorm, and a habit of crawling into Dalton's lap after dinner and falling asleep with her face pressed against his chest, one small hand gripping the leather of his vest like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. Then October 15th, 2019. He was at the clubhouse working late when his phone rang. Jolene's voice rang too high, too fast. Drunk driver, red light, Colby, hospital. Hurry. He made it there in 11 minutes. She was already gone. 7 years old. The drunk driver walked away with a broken collarbone. 26 years old, blood, alcohol, .19, celebrating a promotion. He got 8 years. 8 years for Colby's entire unlived life. Jolene held on for 6 weeks. Stress cardiomyopathy. The doctors called it broken heart syndrome. Dalton sat beside her bed and held her hand and watched the monitors slow and understood that grief was not an emotion. It was a weapon. It killed the people who loved most first. She followed Colby into the dark. Dalton started drinking the night of Jolene's funeral. One glass became two. Two became a bottle. A bottle became the only thing that made the nights end. The brothers tried to help, took shifts, staying with him, hid his keys, dragged him to meetings. Nothing worked. The drink wasn't a choice anymore. It was gravity pulling him toward the graves where his family lay. The vote came in March of 2020. Unanimous. Boone Diesel Hargrove, his best friend since high school, had to say the words, "We're taking your patch hammer. Not because we don't love you, because we love you too much to watch you die. Come back when you are ready to live." Dalton didn't argue, unzipped his vest, handed it over, walked out. The Honda Civic cost $800 and smelled like cigarettes and failure. The delivery app didn't ask about his past, just a license and a car that started. Driver number 7749. $7 an hour to carry food to doors he'd never knock on. But there was one thing about Dalton Skaggs that the delivery app didn't know, that Russell Graves didn't know, that nobody in Pine Ridge had any reason to know. Dalton could read lips, had learned it twice in 2 cages and had never lost it. Some skills are like scars. They don't fade just because you don't use them. When he looked up at that second-floor window on day 261, he saw a girl's face, pale as paper. The bones of her jaw too pronounced for a child her age. Eyes that were enormous and dark and far too knowing. Hair matted and tangled. The kind of neglect that accumulates over months, not days. And her lips were moving. He didn't catch the words. The shadow appeared too fast, the curtain fell too quick, the moment collapsed before his prison-trained eyes could decode the shapes her mouth was making. But he caught enough to know it wasn't a game. Enough to know those lips were saying something no child should have to say through glass. Enough to know that the shadow behind her moved with the weight of ownership the way men move when they believe they have absolute power over something small. Dalton drove 3 blocks away and parked, sat in his dented Civic, hands shaking, not from cold. The tremors had started 6 months ago, when the drinking got bad enough that his body screamed for whiskey before his eyes opened each morning. He thought about the girl, that impossible paleness, those moving lips, the shadow that swallowed her whole. He thought about Colby, about the age she would have been, 8, close to the age of the girl in the window. And he thought about himself, 11 years old in the Henderson foster home, where children were seen and not heard, where speaking above a whisper meant punishment, where caseworkers smiled at the clean kitchen and never looked at the bruises beneath long sleeves. Nobody had looked up for him either. 3 days passed. Wren scratched 3 more lines into the wall, 262, 63, 64. Each morning she stood at the window and performed her signal routine, and no vehicle stopped, and no one came, and the world outside continued its pandemic silence like a machine that had forgotten how to stop. But she had written "he saw" on the wall, and those 2 words changed the chemistry of her waiting. Before she had stood at the window, out of habit, out of the absence of anything else to do, out of a stubbornness that refused to die even when belief had. Now she stood there with a question. Will he come back? Day 264, late afternoon, a car engine cut off in front of the house. Wren went to the window, the same Honda Civic, the same man, same vest, same tattoos, same beard. He walked up the path carrying a bag from Tony's Wings with the slow stride of a man who had driven to this address on purpose. Wren's hands trembled against the glass. She had rehearsed this moment, had practiced in front of the muted television watching news anchors shape words and matching their mouths with her own. She knew which letters were hardest to read from a distance. She knew to slow down, to exaggerate, to keep her lips wide and her jaw open and her movements distinct enough to be decoded from 20 feet below through dirty glass. She pressed her face to the window, breathed once hard, pushing panic down into her stomach where it couldn't reach her mouth. Then she began. Call. She shaped the word like it was the most important sound in the English language, jaw dropping for the vowel, tongue hitting the ridge behind her teeth for the L9, lips pulling back, the long vowel stretching. One, round lips, open throat, one, again, over and over. The man on the sidewalk stopped walking. The bag of food hung at his side, forgotten. His head tilted, his eyes narrowed. He was reading her. Ren saw his expression change. First confusion, then focus, then something that flooded his face like cold water. Understanding, and right behind it, horror. He read her. The curtain jerked. Russell's shadow, fingers on her shoulder. The performance was over. But Ren had seen Dalton's face in that last half second before the curtain fell. She had seen his eyes go wide. She had seen his mouth open. She had seen his body lean forward as if pulled by invisible hands toward the house, toward the window, toward her. He understood. 264 days, dozens of vehicles, dozens of delivery drivers and mailmen and neighbors who looked at everything except the one window that mattered. And finally, one man looked up, came back, and read the words she'd been screaming in silence since the day the lock first clicked. She heard him deliver the food, heard his boots on the porch, heard the bag crinkle against the welcome mat. Then a long silence where a man stood on a cracked porch deciding what to do with what he'd seen. Then footsteps. Engine. Gone. Ren pressed her back against the wall and slid to the floor. She didn't cry. Crying required energy she'd stopped spending months ago. She sat in the dark with her knees pulled to her chest and listened to Russell lock the front door downstairs and walk to the kitchen and pour something into a glass. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the lock on her door was set and the darkness pressed against her like a living thing, she learned what had happened next through the muffled sound of Russell's voice on the phone downstairs. He was angry. That voice. The one he used when something had slipped outside his control. Ren couldn't make out every word through the floor, but she caught enough. Delivery driver. Looking around. Problem. Russell Graves had noticed the same thing Ren had. The man who looked up was not like the others. The man who looked up had come back. Ren lay in the dark and felt something she hadn't felt in 264 days. Not hope. Not yet. Something older than hope. Something that lived beneath it in the bedrock of a 9-year-old girl who had been watching people her entire short life and who understood with the same clarity that had told her Russell was dangerous the day she met him, that the man with the tattoos and the sad eyes was not going to forget what he'd seen. He had looked at her the way no one ever had. Not with pity, not with the blank stare of someone who sees a child in a window and thinks nothing of it. He had looked at her with recognition. Like he knew what it meant to stand behind glass and scream without sound and have the whole world walk by. Ren reached up in the dark and touched the wall above her bed, felt the grooves of 264 scratches beneath her fingertips. Each one a day survived. Each one a mark that said, I was here, I existed, I counted. She found the 2 words she'd scratched 3 days ago. He saw. Traced the letters with her finger. Then she placed her hand flat against the wall against the entire history of her imprisonment and whispered into the dark room the only thing she had left. Come back. Somewhere across Pine Ridge, Dalton Skaggs sat in his apartment with a phone pressed to his ear. 22 minutes on hold. When the hotline operator finally answered, she sounded like someone running on fumes in prayer. He told her everything. The address, the girl, the words on her lips, the shadow, the hand on the shoulder. The eyes that screamed what the mouth couldn't say. The operator typed, paused, typed again. Sir, we have that address flagged. There have been previous calls. How many? I can't disclose that. But the case has been reviewed and closed. Pandemic protocols. The homeowner has provided documentation that the child is under medical quarantine. There is a 9-year-old girl in that window mouthing call 911. Sir, I understand your concern. Without documented evidence of imminent danger, we cannot conduct home visits under current guidelines. Dalton hung up. The system, the same system that had failed him at 11 years old in a foster home where nobody listened. The same system that had let a drunk driver walk away with 8 years for killing a 7-year-old girl. The same system that checked boxes and closed files and called it protection while children disappeared behind locked doors. He looked at the counter. The bottle of whiskey sat where it always sat, amber liquid catching streetlight through the window. 6 months he'd kept it there. Every night he picked it up. Every night something stopped him from opening it. He didn't know what. Tonight he picked it up again, held it, felt the weight of it, felt the promise it made. Oblivion. Silence. The end of feeling anything at all. Then he saw her face pressed against the glass. Bones too sharp, eyes too large. Lips moving with the desperate rhythm of a heartbeat made visible. Call 911. Call 911. Call 911. He set the bottle down, unopened. Not tonight. And across town in a room with 264 scratches on the wall, a girl who had spent nearly 9 months waiting for someone to see her finally had a reason to believe the wait was not for nothing. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, didn't know about Colby or Jolene or the bottle on the counter or the patch that had been taken or the brothers who wept when they took it. She knew only this. He looked up. He came back. He read her lips. And when the hotline failed and the system closed another file and the world kept turning without noticing the girl in the window, he set the bottle down instead of picking it up. Two broken people separated by 20 feet of air and a pane of dirty glass. One who refused to stop standing at the window, and one who refused to stop looking up. 4 days after the second delivery, Dalton Skaggs was back on Elmwood Drive. He'd learned to manipulate the algorithm the way he used to manipulate cops and prosecutors. With patience, with persistence, with the understanding that every system, no matter how sophisticated, had exploitable gaps if you looked hard enough. He'd marked the zone as preferred, adjusted his availability to match the delivery windows, accepted every order within a 2-mile radius of 34 Elmwood Drive until the app's routing software started treating him like he lived there. Same cracked porch, same peeling paint, same wrongness crawling up his spine like cold fingers on warm skin. Different order this time. Wings and garlic bread from Tony's the restaurant that had somehow survived the pandemic by pivoting to delivery only. The owner had lost his wife to the virus 2 weeks earlier. Now he worked 18-hour days because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant remembering. Dalton understood that math intimately. He parked down the street. Casual. Just a delivery driver, stretching his legs. Nothing suspicious about walking up a sidewalk with a food bag. He didn't look at the window, not yet. Walked up the path, set the bag on the mat, stepped back. Then he looked up. She was there. Same dirty curtain pushed aside. Same face, but the deterioration even in 4 days was visible. The hollows beneath her eyes had deepened into bruise-colored crescents. The tendons in her neck stood out like cables when she turned her head. The nightgown was the same one she'd worn both times before. Stained fabric hanging off shoulders that seemed to narrow each time he saw them. But this time was different. This time she was not alone. And this time she was smiling. Not a real smile. This was a mask. A performance stretched across a gaunt face pulled into position by command or by fear. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because the eyes are screaming something the mouth is not allowed to say. Behind her, clearly visible through the glass, stood Russell Graves. Pressed blue shirt, clean-shaven, friendly. The kind of face you'd see on a campaign poster or a church bulletin. His hand rested on the girl's right shoulder, and he was waving at Dalton with his free hand. Father and stepdaughter, happy, family greeting the delivery man. Nothing to see here. But Dalton wasn't watching Russell. He was watching the girl's hands. Her right hand waved in sync with the smile matching the man's performance, beat for beat. Her left hand hung at her side, partially hidden by the nightgown, and her fingers were moving. 9, 1, 1. Over and over, her left hand screaming for help, while her right hand played the role of a happy child. Then she breathed on the glass. Letters formed in the fog and vanished. HELPMEOUT, help me out. Russell's hand tightened on her shoulder. Dalton could see the knuckles whiten from 20 feet below. The smile on the girl's face flickered, terror breaking through like hairline cracks in ice. Then the curtain fell. The front door opened. Russell Graves stepped onto the porch, still smiling, but his eyes were calculating, measuring how much this delivery driver had seen and what to do about it. Delivery, pleasant voice. Cultured. the kind of voice that made juries lean forward and witnesses relax. Yeah, Dalton handed over the bag. Russell pulled a crisp $100 bill from his pocket. Keep the change. Call it a tip for your trouble. He smiled wider, tilted his head the way people do when they're pretending curiosity is casual. You know you're the third delivery person we've had this month. Most people just leave the food and go. A pause calibrated to the millisecond. But you like to look around. Just doing my job. Of course you are. Russell's smile didn't change, but his voice dropped half a register. My stepdaughter gets excited when delivery people come. Isolation has been hard on her. Immune condition, doctor's orders. She likes to play pretend. Imagine she's in a fairy tale trapped in a tower waiting for a prince. A small laugh perfectly manufactured. Kids and their imaginations. She looked like she was trying to say something. She mouths the words to her favorite songs. Taylor Swift mostly. 9-year-olds. Russell held Dalton's eyes. The smile stayed fixed. But something behind it shifted. A door closing, a decision being made. Thanks for the tip. Dalton took the 100, walked to his car, started the engine, drove around the corner and parked in the shadow of a church that hadn't held services in 2 months. He sat there, wrote everything on his phone. Time, 6:47 p.m. Address, 34 Elmwood Drive. Man's description, white male, approximately 45, 6 feet clean-shaven blue shirt. Girl's signals, left hand tapping 911, letters on glass. Help me out, right hand performing on command. The $100 bill sat on his dashboard like a bribe that didn't know it had already failed. Upstairs at 34 Elmwood Drive, the lock clicked. Russell's footsteps climbed the stairs, heavy, the weight that meant anger. The door opened. He didn't yell. Russell Graves never yelled. Yelling was for men who lacked control, and control was the one thing Russell never lacked. He spoke quietly, evenly, each word placed with surgical precision. You were performing for him. Wren said nothing. The hand. You thought I didn't see your left hand. Silence. You are going to stop this. You are going to stay away from that window. And if that man comes back, you will smile and wave and do nothing else. Do you understand? Wren looked at the floor, nodded once. Russell left. The lock clicked, and in the dark after his footsteps faded, Wren went to her wall and began recording everything she knew about the man with the tattoos. Not with a pen, she didn't have one. With her fingernail pressing into soft plaster, creating marks only she could read by touch. Tattoos. Both arms, full sleeves, dark ink, Celtic and tribal. Beard, long, white-gray, chest length, vest, black leather, sleeveless, patches, red emblem, vehicle, Honda Civic, old, dented. She was building a file. The way a detective builds a case. The way a prisoner maps escape routes. Because Wren Ashford had been watching people her entire life. And she knew with the certainty of a child who trusts her own eyes above everything that the man with the tattoos and the sad eyes was not finished. He would come back. 2 days later, Russell Graves made 2 mistakes. The first was a phone call, 10:14 p.m. Dalton was in his apartment, sitting in the chair by the window where he sat every night, not sleeping, not drinking, just existing in the space between one delivery shift and the next. His phone rang, unknown number. Mr. Skaggs, Russell's voice, calm, pleasant, carrying the warm authority of a man accustomed to controlling rooms. Or should I call you Hammer? That is what they used to call you, isn't it, before they took your patch? Dalton said nothing. I know who you are. Former president of the Steel Legion, aggravated assault conviction. 3 years in Huntsville, currently delivering food for $7 an hour because no legitimate employer will touch a man with your record. A pause. I also know about Colby. The name hit like a fist to the sternum. Dalton's hand tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked. 7 years old, killed by a drunk driver. October 15th, 2019. Beautiful little girl. Green eyes, I'm told. Say her name again. I'm simply illustrating a point, Mr. Skaggs. You've already lost one child. It would be a shame to invite additional tragedy into your life by interfering with matters you don't understand. I understand a 9-year-old girl writing "help me out" on a window. You understand nothing. The warmth left Russell's voice like heat leaving a room when the furnace dies. You are a convicted felon with a drinking problem and a dead daughter. I am a deputy district attorney with connections in every law enforcement office in this county. If you come near my property again, I will have you arrested. If you contact CPS again, I will ensure that your call is treated as harassment. And if you speak to anyone about what you think you saw, I will bury you in legal proceedings that will consume every dollar you don't have and every year you have left. Silence on the line. Then Russell's voice returned to its courtroom warmth. Go home, Mr. Skaggs. Deliver your pizzas. Forget the window. The line went dead. Russell's second mistake was simpler and more fatal. He didn't know that Dalton Skaggs had been recording every phone call since 1998, a habit from prison that never went away. Every conversation, every voicemail, every threat, stored on a hard drive in a fireproof box under his bed. The habit of a man who had learned the hard way that the only truth the world respects is the truth you can prove. Russell Graves had just handed Dalton a recording of a deputy district attorney threatening a private citizen with fabricated legal action to prevent reporting of suspected child abuse. Both mistakes would cost Russell everything, but he didn't know that yet. Upstairs, Wren lay awake. She'd heard the tone of Russell's voice through the floor, not the words but the tone, the satisfied one, the one he used after he'd eliminated a threat. She pressed her hand against the wall, found the scratched description of the man with the tattoos, traced the letters in the dark. He will come back, she told herself. But the voice of 270 days whispered back, they never come back. Wren closed her eyes. She would be wrong about one of those voices. She didn't know which one yet. Delivery number 4, 3 days later, day 273, same house, same routine. But Wren was worse. Dalton saw it from the sidewalk before he reached the porch. She was at the window, but barely, propped against the frame like someone who had used the last of her strength to reach the glass. Her face had crossed a line. The ridge of her collarbone jutted above the neckline of the nightgown, like the hull of a boat surfacing through shallow water. Her wrists, where the sleeves had ridden up, were thin enough that Dalton could have circled them with his thumb and forefinger. And on the left one, a bruise the color of a storm cloud. She mouthed the words, slower now, call 911. Her lips barely moved, but her eyes were ferocious, burning with something that had no business existing in a body that was shutting down. Defiance. Pure distilled 9-year-old defiance that said, I am still here and you have not broken me, and I will stand at this window until someone answers. The curtain closed. Russell's shadow. Dalton walked away. Delivery number 5. 3 days later, day 276. The last delivery. Wren couldn't stand. Dalton saw her through the glass sitting on the floor beneath the window, head tilted back against the sill. She dragged herself there. He could see the effort it had cost in the way her chest heaved and her hands trembled against the dirty fabric of the nightgown. She couldn't reach the glass to write on it, couldn't lift herself high enough to be fully seen from below. But she'd pulled the curtain aside with fingers that shook and her lips were moving. The same 3 words, slower than ever, each syllable a battle. Call 911. Dalton stood on the sidewalk and looked up at a child who was dying in an upstairs room and who used what might have been her last reserves of strength to crawl to a window and beg a stranger to save her life. He did not drive away. He walked to his car, sat behind the wheel, and made a decision that would change both their lives. He was done asking the system for permission, done calling hotlines that put him on hold for 22 minutes, and closed his cases with pandemic protocols. Done playing by rules written by people like Russell Graves to protect people like Russell Graves. He was going to get that girl out of that house, whatever it cost. That night at 11:47 p.m., day 278, his phone rang again. Unknown number. But this time a woman's voice, tight with fear, rough like she'd been crying for hours or years. Is this Dalton Skaggs? Who's asking? My name is Lorene Pratt, and I know you've been to 34 Elmwood Drive 5 times in the past 18 days. Silence. I've been watching that house for 2 years, Mr. Skaggs, waiting for someone, anyone to notice what's happening inside. You're the first person who's looked at that window more than once. The first person who seems to give a damn. How do you know what I've been doing? Because I park on Birchwood Court every Tuesday and Thursday evening with binoculars and a notebook, and I write down every person who approaches that house. I've been doing it since my son died. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. 3 years ago, I had a son named Kieran. He was 10 years old, bright, curious, the kind of kid who asked questions about everything and remembered the answers. Her voice cracked, steadied. Russell Graves was his foster father for 11 months. Then Kieran died. Officially complications from a chronic medical condition. That's what the death certificate says. And unofficially, I spent my savings on a private exhumation. The pathologist found signs of prolonged malnutrition, evidence of old bone fractures that had healed without medical treatment. My son didn't die from a medical condition, Mr. Skaggs. He was starved until his body gave out. Dalton couldn't speak. I've been trying to get someone to listen for 2 years. Police, FBI, journalists, county commissioners. Everyone is either too scared or too connected to touch a deputy DA. How many children? Kieran wasn't the first. The words fell into silence and stayed there. Before my son, there was Daniel Morrison. Foster placement in 2012. Died in 2014 at age 11. Complications from a chronic condition. No autopsy. Before Daniel Sophie Marsh. Foster placement in 2014. Died in 2016 at age 9. Same diagnosis, same doctor, same caseworker, closing the file. Dalton's hand gripped the phone so hard his knuckles ached. 3 children in 8 years, Mr. Skaggs. All foster placements arranged through the same CPS contact, a woman named Margaret Holt. All entering Russell Graves' care healthy, all declining rapidly, all dying of complications that nobody investigated because nobody investigates a deputy district attorney who files the right paperwork and knows the right people. 3 dead, 1 alive. That girl in the window is number 4. Her name is Wren Ashford. She's 9 years old. Her mother died in a car accident last summer. Russell married the mother in 2018. When the mother died, the girl came with the house. Lorene paused. Daniel's death netted $112,000 in insurance and overpayments. Sophie brought $96,000. Kieran $139,000. Add disability benefits, pandemic relief, survivor payments, and Russell Graves has collected over $600,000 from children who entered his care and never came out alive. Why are you telling me this now? Because something's changed. Lorene's voice tightened. I have a contact at the county assessor's office. Yesterday, Russell listed 34 Elmwood Drive for sale. Off-market cash deal, closing tomorrow morning. Moving trucks at 8 a.m. The room tilted. When that truck leaves, the girl goes with it. He'll relocate. New state, new identity, new paperwork. And Wren Ashford disappears. Another tragic death in a year or two. Another closed file. Dalton looked at the clock. 11:52 p.m. 8 hours until the trucks arrived. There's one more thing. That local police officer you've been thinking about reaching out to, Don Whitfield. How do you know about that? Because I reached out to him myself 18 months ago. He took my statement, promised to investigate. 3 days later, Russell Graves called me personally and quoted my statement back to me word for word. Whitfield is Russell's man, has been for years. The official channels are sealed shut. Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Mr. Skaggs, I have 47 pages of evidence. Bank records, insurance claims, medical files from all 4 children, exhumation reports. I've been building this folder for 2 years waiting for the right moment and the right person. Her voice dropped. I think the moment is now, and I think the person is you. I'm a washed-up drunk who delivers pizza for $7 an hour. You have the Steel Legion. They took my patch weeks ago. They took your title. They didn't take your history. 270 men who rode with you, fought with you, would have died for you. That kind of loyalty doesn't disappear because of a vote. Why me? Because you're the only one who looked twice. Because somewhere inside that broken-down delivery driver is a man who built an army out of nothing. Because my son is dead and I couldn't save him. She was weeping now. But maybe you can save her. The line went dead. Dalton sat in darkness. phone pressed to his ear, staring at the bottle of whiskey on his kitchen counter. Amber liquid catching streetlight, glowing like something precious, something poisonous. Across town, Wren Ashford lay in her room and listened to the sounds of her own disappearance. Cardboard boxes sliding across hardwood, packing tape screeching off the roll, drawers opening and closing. Russell was efficient, methodical, the way he was with everything. She understood what was happening. She'd heard him on the phone 2 days ago, voice low and businesslike, discussing timelines and logistics. She didn't know the word relocation, but she knew the shape of it. She knew that boxes meant leaving, and leaving meant no more window, and no more window meant no one would ever see her again. She crawled to the wall, found her penny, scratched line 278. Tomorrow would be the last day. She knew it the way an animal knows when the cage is about to move. Next to the number, she pressed the penny deep and carved 5 words into the plaster. Somebody will see me. Not a prayer, not a hope. An oath, sworn to a wall in a dark room by a girl who had been failed by every institution built to protect her, and who refused, with the last stubborn spark of something adults had tried and failed to extinguish, to believe the world was as blind as it pretended to be. She lay down on the bare mattress and closed her eyes and waited for whatever morning would bring. 4 miles away, Dalton Skaggs picked up the bottle of whiskey. He held it for a long time, felt the cool glass against his palm, the weight of months of grief compressed into 750 milliliters of amber liquid. Every night for 6 months he had held this bottle. Every night something had stopped him from twisting the cap. He hadn't known what. Now he knew. He walked to the kitchen sink, unscrewed the cap, tilted the bottle, watched the whiskey spiral down the drain, catching the light as it fell golden and gone and irreversible. The smell hit him, sharp, sweet, familiar as his own heartbeat. His hands shook, his throat ached, his body screamed for what his mind was pouring away. He emptied every drop, set the bottle on the counter, picked up his phone, dialed a number he had sworn never to call again. 3 rings. Hello, Boone Diesel, Hargrove's voice, rough with sleep. Diesel, it's Hammer. Long pause, the sound of a man sitting up in bed. It's midnight, Dalton. I know, I need help. You in jail need bail. I need you to listen. There's a girl, 9 years old, locked in a house for almost a year. The man who has her is a deputy DA with connections in every office in the county. CPS has closed 9 complaints. Police are compromised. And in 8 hours, he's putting her in a moving truck and she disappears forever. Silence. I know I burned every bridge. I know I drank myself out of the brotherhood. But this girl, his voice cracked, held. She's the same age Colby would have been, and I can't let another one die. Not when I can see her. Not when I know. The longest pause of Dalton's life. How many people do you need? As many as you can get. By when? 7 a.m. Elmwood Drive, Pine Ridge. That's a big ask. Pandemic scattered everyone. I'm not asking for everyone, just whoever answers. Another pause. Then something changed in Boone's voice. Something that had been buried beneath caution and grief surfaced like bedrock after a flood. I'll make calls. 12:17 a.m., the chain began. Boone Hargrove dialed Rattler in East Austin, then Big Mike in Round Rock, then Preacher in San Marcos. 17 calls in 30 minutes, each one the same message. There's a kid, 9 years old, locked up almost a year. The man who has her is connected. Deputy D. A friend's at CPS cops in his pocket. Moving trucks at 8 a.m. When that truck leaves, she disappears forever. Hammer needs bodies. Elmwood Drive, Pine Ridge, 7 o'clock. Be there or don't. By 1:30, San Antonio was waking up. By 2:15, phones rang in Houston and Dallas. By 3, the message had crossed into Oklahoma. A child, a deadline, a brother who needed help. Some said no. Families, wives, health conditions, fear. The pandemic had scattered people to their separate corners and sealed them in with anxiety and the low-grade terror of a world that had stopped making sense. One man in Houston laughed and hung up. Another in Dallas asked if Dalton was drunk again. But most said yes. They said yes because they remembered who Dalton Skaggs had been before the bottle. They said yes because the Steel Legion's code said you protect children and codes don't expire when they become inconvenient. They said yes because they were fathers and grandfathers who had spent months locked in houses watching the news and feeling powerless, and the chance to ride through the night for something that mattered was worth the risk. And some said yes because they had heard the words 9 years old and locked up for a year, and those words made them sick in a way no virus ever could. At 3:47, Boone called back. 43 from Austin, 28 from San Antonio, Houston and Dallas still coming in, 96 total. Climbing. More than I expected. People remember you, Dalton. Remember what you were before the bottle took over. Pause. Denny Culver is coming. Dalton closed his eyes. Denny Ghost Culver. The man he'd fought at the clubhouse the night before they took his patch. The man who'd told him he was dead to the brotherhood. Wife home. His daughters are 8. When I told him about the girl in the window, he went quiet for 30 seconds and said he'd be there if he had to ride through hellfire on a bicycle. Dalton couldn't speak. Whatever happens today, Boone continued, you need to know, we didn't take your patch because we stopped loving you. We took it because watching you die was killing us too. I know. Good. Now try to rest. Dalton didn't rest. He sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote everything. Names, dates, addresses, Lorene Pratt's information, the recording of Russell's threat, the 5 deliveries documented with times and observations, the words on the glass, the bruise on the girl's wrist. At 5:15, he drove to a 24-hour copy shop and made 50 copies. Then he drove to Pine Ridge and parked 2 blocks from Elmwood Drive in the shadow of the church with the empty parking lot. The sky was still dark, but in the east, the first gray light of dawn was bleeding through. He waited. At 6:23, the thunder began. It came from the east where the highway connected Pine Ridge to Austin. A sound like distant storms rolling across the prairie, growing louder, closer, shaking the air itself. Motorcycles, 5 bikes, then 10, then 20. Riding in formation, chrome catching the first light of morning engines growling in unison. Boone was in front, massive frame hunched over a road king that had seen better days and worse roads. Behind him, faces Dalton hadn't seen in months. Rattler with his red beard, Big Mike, preacher who traded seminary for outlaws because he said Jesus hung out with sinners too. At 6:41 San Antonio, 28 bikes including 3 women who rode harder than most men Dalton knew. At 6:52 Houston, 17 bikes that had left at 3 in the morning and pushed through darkness without stopping. At 7:03 Dallas, 14 more. At 7:12 a single bike from Oklahoma. A man named Crow who hadn't spoken to Dalton in 3 years, who had ridden 6 hours through the dark because some things are bigger than grudges. At 7:14, Denny Ghost Culver killed his engine. Beside Dalton, sat for a long moment with his helmet on, then pulled it off and said 5 words. Where's the kid Hammer? By 7:15, the formation filled Elmwood Drive and the streets around it. 163 motorcycles. Neighbors emerged from houses. Faces appeared in windows. Someone was filming. In the distance, a siren wailed. Dalton stood at the head of the formation. Thank you, all of you. Boone stepped forward. Don't thank us yet. What's the play? Dalton pointed at 34 Elmwood Drive. A moving truck sat in the driveway. Big, cross-country size. 2 men in coveralls stood beside it checking phones. Truck arrived 20 minutes ago. He's inside packing. The girl is upstairs. When that truck moves, she goes with it. We block the driveway, block the street, every exit, and we wait. Wait for what? Cops, feds, cameras, whatever cavalry comes. I have evidence. A woman named Lorene Pratt, whose son was one of Graves's previous victims. Medical records, exhumation reports, bank statements. Once that goes public, his protection evaporates. And if the cops try to arrest us instead, then we make sure the whole world is watching, every phone recording, every camera rolling. Let them try to arrest 160 bikers for standing on a public street protecting a child. See how that plays on the evening news. From the back of the formation, a voice. Old, weathered, Crow from Oklahoma. Last time I got up this early was when a raccoon got into my trash and I had to chase it across 3 yards in my underwear. This better be more dignified than that. Laughter. Brief, the kind that releases pressure without breaking focus. Then tight again. At 7:18, the front door of 34 Elmwood Drive opened. Russell Graves stepped out, khakis and a blue polo, Saturday casual. He carried a cardboard box labeled kitchen and walked toward the moving truck with the confident stride of a man who had never faced a consequence he couldn't manage. Then he saw the motorcycles. He stopped. The box slipped an inch. The formation stood in absolute silence. No revving engines, no shouted threats, just a wall of leather and chrome and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Russell recovered, set down the box, straightened his shirt, smiled. "Good morning. Can I help you with something?" Dalton walked forward, stopped 10 feet away. "Where's the girl?" "My stepdaughter is resting inside, medical condition." "Her doctor?" "Then why the moving truck relocating? Better climate for her health." "Like you arranged for Daniel Morrison, and Sophie Marsh, and Kieran Pratt." The blood drained from Russell Graves' face. 3 foster children in 8 years' graves. All entering your care healthy. All dead within 2 years. All ruled medical complications without autopsies. All generating 6-figure payouts. "You're delusional." The cultured voice cracked. "You're an ex-con. A drunk? A disgrace? Well, maybe, but I've got recordings, financial documents, exhumation reports, and 163 witnesses with cameras." At 7:34, a single motorcycle turned onto Elmwood Drive. The rider was a woman. She removed her helmet and her hair fell around a face carved by grief into something like forged iron. Lorene Pratt walked past the riders, past Russell, without granting him the dignity of eye contact. She handed Dalton a manila envelope. Everything: bank records, insurance claims, medical files from all 4 children, exhumation results. "It's all here." Dalton opened it. 47 pages. 4 children's lives reduced to paper. Daniel Morrison died 2014, age 11. Sophie Marsh died 2016, age 9. Kieran Pratt died 2017, age 10. Ren Ashford, age 9. Still alive. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "This is Dalton Skaggs at 34 Elmwood Drive, Pine Ridge. I'm reporting a child in immediate danger. Her name is Ren Ashford, age 9. She's being held against her will by Russell Graves, Deputy District Attorney. I have documentary evidence linking Graves to the deaths of at least 3 other children. There are approximately 160 witnesses on scene and news crews have been contacted. Send police and paramedics immediately." He hung up. Russell stared at him. "You just destroyed your life." "Maybe, but she'll have hers." And upstairs in a locked room with 278 scratches on the wall, Ren Ashford heard the motorcycles. She had heard the first engine at 6:23, then more. The sound building like a wave through the floorboards, through the walls, through the thin mattress where she lay with her penny clutched in her fist. She dragged herself to the window. It took everything she had. Her arms shook, her vision blurred at the edges, but she reached the glass, pulled the curtain aside, looked down. The street was full of them. Motorcycles and leather stretching in both directions as far as she could see. Men and women standing in silence, facing her house, facing her window. An army that had materialized from the dark. And standing at the front, looking up the way he'd looked up on day 261, was the man with the tattoos and the sad eyes and the beard that reached his chest. He saw her. For the first time since day 1, Ren smiled. Not the mask Russell forced onto her face. Real. Small and broken and barely there, like the first crack of light through a door sealed for 9 months. She pressed her hand against the glass. "Somebody saw me." The next 40 minutes were the longest of Ren Ashford's life. She sat at the window and watched her own rescue unfold through dirty glass, reading lips, the way she'd taught herself over months of silent television. The skill Russell had accidentally given her by taking away sound. Now it let her follow the scene below with the muted clarity of a film with subtitles only she could see. 4 squad cars arrived at 7:52, 8 officers, a sergeant named Caldwell, who had been on the Pine Ridge Force for 22 years and had never encountered anything like the scene on Elmwood Drive. The formation of motorcycles, news vans at both ends of the street, Two helicopters overhead, neighbors on porches with phones raised. And in the middle of it all, Russell Graves still insisting that his connections would make this go away. Wren watched Russell's mouth move as he spoke to the sergeant. Smooth shapes. Practiced. These men have been harassing my family. I want them arrested. Caldwell's response was measured. Careful, I've received information I need to verify. Where is your stepdaughter inside? Resting. Medical condition. I'd like to see her. That's not possible. Mr. Graves. Steel entered the sergeant's jaw. Wren could read the shift in his posture, the way his weight moved forward onto the balls of his feet. I'm not asking. Wren watched Russell calculate. She knew that face. The micro-expressions that preceded every decision, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the tightening of the brow. She'd studied that face for 278 days the way a prisoner studies the guard who holds the keys. Fine. The forced smile. Come inside. I'll show you. My stepdaughter is perfectly healthy. He turned toward the house. Caldwell followed. Two officers behind him. Wren heard the front door open. Boots on hardwood. Russell's muffled voice, pleasant and controlled, offering coffee, explaining the medical situation with rehearsed fluency. Then footsteps on the stairs. The lock. The familiar click that had defined her existence for 9 months. But this time the footsteps on the other side were heavier, slower, belonging to a man who didn't know what he was about to find. The door opened. Sergeant Caldwell stood in the frame. 54 years old, gray at the temples, hands that had handcuffed men twice his size without trembling. He looked into the room and his hands began to shake. 12 feet by 14 feet. A bare mattress on a metal frame. A bucket in the corner. A muted television bolted to a dresser. No books, no toys, no color anywhere except the gray of dust and the yellow of old plaster. And the wall, 278 lines scratched into the surface above the bed. Neat groups of 5, 4 vertical, 1 diagonal, running in rows from left to right, covering an area 3 feet wide and 2 feet tall. A calendar made of desperation. A monument built by a child with a penny and nothing else. Wren sat on the mattress, 73 pounds. The weight of a healthy 5-year-old stretched across the frame of a girl who should have been playing softball and arguing about bedtimes and rolling her eyes at her mother's jokes. Skin so pale it was translucent, pulled tight across bones, that told the story of 9 months of starvation more clearly than any medical report ever could. The nightgown hung from her like a surrender flag, but her eyes were open, conscious, fixed on Caldwell with an expression the sergeant would later describe in his report as the most controlled and deliberate gaze he had ever witnessed from a child. She did not cry, did not reach for him, did not speak. She simply looked at him and waited. The way she had looked at every person who had ever come to that window and walked away. Patient, watchful, expecting nothing, hoping for everything. Caldwell's radio was at his lips before his next breath. Dispatch, immediate medical assistance at 34 Elmwood Drive. Child victim, approximately 9 years old. Severe malnourishment. Possible dehydration. Multiple signs of prolonged neglect. This is now a crime scene. He turned to the officers behind him. His voice had changed. The measured tone was gone. Cuff him, now. Wren heard it from the mattress. Boots moving fast downstairs. Russell's voice rising for the first time, the cultured control cracking like thin ice. You don't understand. I'm a deputy district attorney. I have rights. Nobody answered him. The sound of handcuffs, metal on wrist, a click that was the mirror image of the click that had locked her door 9 months ago. Same sound, opposite meaning. Then the front door opened, and Wren heard something she had not heard in 278 days. The silence of the formation breaking. Not with words, with breath. The collective exhale of 163 people watching a man in handcuffs walk into sunlight. She crawled to the window, pressed her face against the glass one final time, looked down. Russell Graves stood on his own porch in handcuffs, flanked by officers. His face was twisted. Not the smooth mask anymore. Something beneath it had surfaced. The real face. The one Wren had seen in the dark when no one else was watching. He looked up at the window. Their eyes met, and Wren Ashford, 73 pounds, 9 years old, 279 days in a locked room looked down at the man who had stolen her mother, her childhood, her voice in her world. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She held his gaze until the officers guided him into the squad car, and the door closed and the car pulled away, and Russell Graves disappeared down Elmwood. On Wood Drive, past the motorcycles, past the cameras that would broadcast his face on every network in America by noon. Gone. The paramedics came next, two of them moving quickly up the stairs with a stretcher. They spoke to her gently, asked permission before touching her, wrapped her in a thermal blanket that felt like being held by something warm for the first time in 9 months. They lifted her onto the stretcher, light as paper. One of them, a woman about Nora's age, looked at the wall of scratches and stopped walking. Just stopped. Stood there staring at 278 lines carved by a child's hand and couldn't move until her partner said her name twice. They carried Wren down the stairs. Through the living room where boxes half-packed for a relocation that would never happen sat on a floor that still smelled like Russell's aftershave. Through the front door, into the morning. Sunlight hit Wren's face and she closed her eyes, not from pain, from the sheer overwhelming sensation of warmth on skin that had not felt direct sun since July of the previous year. She lay on the stretcher with her eyes closed and felt the heat on her cheeks and the wind in what was left of her hair and the sound of the world real and open and unfiltered by glass and curtain and locked doors. She opened her eyes. Sky, vast and blue and infinite in a way that 9 months in a room had made her forget was possible. A single cloud drifted across the blue-white and slow. Wren tracked it and felt something she couldn't name. Not happiness. Not yet. Something before happiness. The raw, aching awareness that the world was still there, still beautiful, still turning, and that she was finally outside of the glass looking at it. The riders parted in silence. Men and women who had ridden through the dark stood motionless as the paramedics carried her between them. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was boots on pavement and the distant wail of a second ambulance approaching. Wren turned her head on the stretcher and found him. Dalton Skaggs stood at the edge of the formation, massive shoulders rigid, fists clenched at his sides so hard the tattoos on his forearms rippled. His beard was wet. Their eyes met, the same way they'd met through a dirty window on day 261. But this time there was no glass between them, no curtain to fall, no shadow to swallow her whole. Wren's lips moved. 2 words, barely a whisper. But Dalton read them the way he'd been reading lips since Huntsville, the way he'd read her signal through a second-story window, the way a man reads the only words that matter. You saw me. Dalton's knees buckled. Boone caught him before he hit the ground. And the man who had held himself together through the death of his daughter and the death of his wife and the death of everything he'd built finally fell apart. Because a 9-year-old girl on a stretcher had said the one thing he needed to hear. He wept. The kind of weeping that comes from somewhere so deep it doesn't have a name. Around him the Steel Legion closed ranks. They formed a circle, shielding him from the cameras, giving him space to break in the company of people who understood that breaking was sometimes the only way to begin again. The ambulance doors closed. The siren started. Wren Ashford left 34 Elmwood Drive for the last time. She turned her face to the ceiling of the ambulance and began to count. Not days, not scratches, breaths. Each one proof she was alive, that the window was behind her, that somebody had seen. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and something Wren couldn't name until hours later, when it came to her like a word on the tip of her tongue. Safety. It smelled like safety. Small room, beige walls, machines beeping in rhythms that sounded like a pulse she could trust. A window that looked out over a parking lot where the motorcycles sat in neat rows chrome, catching afternoon sun. They hadn't left. Bikers stood in clusters, some leaning against their machines, some sitting on curbs. They had volunteered for shifts, guard duty, around the clock until the girl inside was safe. Not because anyone told them to, because some things you don't need to be told. A nurse had cleaned her up, gently, slowly asking permission before every touch. The matted hair was brushed back. The dirt was gone from her cheeks. She wore a hospital gown that was clean and soft and was not the nightgown she'd worn for months. Wren sat propped against pillows. She was watching the way sunlight moved across the floor of the room, tracking the slow progression of the rectangle of gold as it shifted with the angle of the sun. She had not seen sunlight on a floor in 9 months. The simple geometry of it, light falling through glass at an angle, projecting a shape that changed with time, was enough to hold her attention completely. The door opened. Dalton Skaggs stood in the frame. Same dirty delivery uniform, pizza grease and gasoline, and the sharp, clean smell of a man who had just washed his face in a hospital bathroom and tried to make himself presentable for a 9-year-old he'd pulled from a locked room. His hands were steady, not the tremor he'd carried for 6 months. Something had stilled in him. Wren looked at him. He looked at her. The same exchange they'd had through glass, but now with nothing between them except 12 feet of hospital air. Wren spoke first. "You came back 5 times." Her voice was rough, unused. The doctor had told Dalton she hadn't spoken in 9 months. 9 months of silence, and these were the words she chose to break it with. "You counted. I scratched the wall after each delivery. 261, 64, 68, 73, 76. She paused. "You were the only one who looked up." "What do you mean other people came?" "Delivery men, mailman, lady from next door once with a little dog." The dog knew. The dog pulled toward the house and whined. She paused, but the lady just tugged the leash and kept walking. They all looked at the house, the door, the ground, their phones. Nobody looked at the window. A breath. "But you did. Every time. I could see you." "Why?" Dalton pulled a plastic chair to the bedside, sat down at her eye level. "Because I knew what it looked like. A kid trapped behind glass, screaming without sound. I knew because I was that kid once, long time ago. Different house, same window." Wren studied him with those watching eyes, reading him the way she read everyone. "Is that why you came back?" "Part of it." "What's the other part?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a photograph, worn, creased, faded from handling. A little girl with green eyes and a stubborn chin sitting on the back of a motorcycle grinning like she owned the world. Her name was Colby, my daughter. She was 7 when she died, 6 months ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. He turned the photo so Wren could see. "She'd be 8 now, close to your age." Wren looked at the photograph for a long time. "She looks happy. Happiest kid I ever knew. Quiet. When she died, I wanted to die too. Drank, lost my club, lost myself. Every night for 6 months I held a bottle of whiskey and something stopped me from opening it. I didn't know what." "But you didn't die." "No." "What stopped you?" He looked at her, at the hollow cheeks and the enormous eyes and the hospital gown draped over shoulders that had no business being that thin. "I think I was waiting for something I didn't know was coming." He set the photograph on the edge of the bed. "I think I was waiting for you." Wren's eyes filled. Not the tears of a child who is sad. The tears of a child who has held herself together for 279 days through sheer force of will and who has finally been given permission to stop. "I was waiting too," she whispered, "every day at that window, waiting for someone to see me, really see me." She wiped her eyes with the back of a hand so thin the veins showed through like rivers on a map. "I made up stories, fairy tales where a knight would break down the door. I stopped believing around day 200, but I kept standing there anyway. Because if I stopped, it meant I was already dead even though I was still breathing. And then I showed up. And then you showed up," the ghost of a smile. "You didn't look like a knight. You looked like a pizza man with sad eyes and a big beard." The smile flickered wider. "But you looked at me." Dalton reached out and took her hand, small in his, fragile. "I made a promise when I was a kid, in a bad place, no one coming to help. I promised if I ever saw another kid in trouble, I'd do something. I'd be the person nobody was for me." He squeezed gently. "I broke a lot of promises in my life, Wren, but I couldn't break that one." Silence. Machines beeped. Outside, someone laughed. One of the bikers finally releasing tension. The sound drifted through the window like music from another world. "So both of us learned to survive by not making sound," Wren said quietly. Dalton looked at her. 9 years old, and she had just distilled both their stories into a single sentence. "Yeah," he said, "both of us." "What happens now?" "Now you get better. Doctors take care of you. And then we figure it out. You're not alone anymore." Her hand tightened on his, the grip of a child who had learned that people who left didn't always return. "I promise," he said, "I'm not going anywhere." The days that followed were not a straight line from darkness to light. They were not a montage set to music where wounds heal in minutes and smiles replace scars and everything bad becomes a memory that fades to sepia. The days that followed were hard, harder in some ways than the room, because the room had rules. Terrible rules, but rules. And outside the room, the world had none. Wren could not sleep with the lights off. Darkness meant the room, meant the click of the lock, meant Russell's footsteps on the stairs. For the first 3 weeks, she slept with every light burning, and when a well-meaning nurse dimmed them after midnight, Wren woke screaming in a voice that hadn't made sound in 9 months and couldn't stop once it started. She could not eat in front of people. For 279 days, food had been Russell's weapon. He decided when she ate, what she ate, how much. Eating in the presence of another human being triggered a panic so deep it bypassed language and went straight to the body. Her hands shook, her throat closed, her stomach rejected what her brain knew she needed. She could not tolerate anyone standing behind her. The shadow, Russell's shadow rising behind her at the window, fingers descending onto her shoulder. A paramedic who walked behind her wheelchair on the third day and placed a hand on her back triggered a dissociative episode that lasted 40 minutes and left Wren curled on the floor, eyes open and empty, gone to a place no one could reach. The doctors used words like trauma response and hypervigilance and complex PTSD. They were accurate words, clinical words, words that described what had been done to a 9-year-old girl without conveying what it felt like to be that girl trying to rebuild herself from the inside out. But Wren rebuilt, because Wren had always been a girl who watched, who counted, who organized chaos into patterns she could control, and she applied the same relentless methodology to her own recovery that she'd applied to her survival. She started counting again, not days of imprisonment, days of freedom. Day 1, saw the sky without glass. Day 7, ate ice cream, strawberry, alone in the room, door closed, but ate it, every bite. Day 12, walked outside, felt grass under bare feet for the first time in 9 months, stood in the hospital garden and cried for 20 minutes because the world was so enormous and she had forgotten how much space there was in it. Day 19, slept for 3 hours with the lights at half. Day 26, ate a grilled cheese sandwich in the cafeteria. 2 nurses sat at the next table. Wren kept her back to the wall, but she ate. Day 30, slept through the night without screaming. She scratched the count into a notebook the hospital gave her. Same groups of 5, same neat rows. But these marks measured something different. Not endurance, emergence. Dalton came every day, never pushed, never hovered. He sat in the plastic chair and talked when she wanted it talking and was silent when she wanted silence. He brought her books because she asked for them. Chapter books at first, then thicker ones. She read the way she did everything, methodically, hungrily, consuming worlds she'd been locked away from. He told her about Colby, about Jolene, about the bottle he'd poured down the drain the night before the rescue. He told her about the Steel Legion and the Code and the brothers who had ridden through the dark, because some things matter more than sleep and fear and the distance between cities. He told her about the foster homes, about the Hendersons, about learning to read lips in a prison cell because speaking above a whisper meant violence. And Wren listened with those watching eyes and said something that made Dalton realize this child understood him better than most adults ever had. You looked up because you remembered what it was like to be looked past. That's different from looking up because you're curious. One saves people, the other just sees them. Margaret Holt was arrested the same week as Russell. 4 of her CPS staff followed within the month. The FBI expanded the investigation to cover all 4 children. Federal charges were filed, wire fraud, benefits fraud, civil rights violations, and 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter that the prosecution argued should have been murder. Russell Graves stood trial in a federal courtroom 8 months later. The evidence was overwhelming. Lorene Pratt's 47 pages, Dalton's recordings, the wall of scratches photographed and entered as Exhibit 14, medical records from 4 children showing the same pattern, healthy on intake, declining over months, Dead or near dead within 2 years. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Russell Graves was sentenced to life without parole. He would die in a federal prison. The same kind of cage where Dalton had learned to read lips and Wren had learned to survive in silence. A cage without a window. But the trial was not the hardest battle. The hardest battle came after. Dalton filed for adoption on the 63rd day of Wren's freedom. The state's response arrived on the 68th. Denied. Pending review. His criminal record. The aggravated assault conviction. 3 years in Huntsville. His former leadership of the Steel Legion, classified by law enforcement as a potential criminal organization. His history of alcohol dependency. The caseworker who reviewed the file saw numbers and categories and risk factors. She did not see a man who had poured whiskey down a drain and ridden through the dark to save a child. Wren was placed in temporary foster care. A good family, kind people, clean house, proper meals in a room with a window that opened from the inside. She stopped eating. Not because the foster family was unkind, not because the room was bad. She stopped eating because the system that had ignored her for 279 days was now deciding her future, and the only weapon she had ever possessed was the one Russell had accidentally given her. Silence. She stopped speaking, stopped engaging, retreated into the same stillness that had protected her in the locked room, but this time it was not submission. It was strategy. A 9-year-old girl wielding the only power available to her against an institution that understood paperwork better than people. The foster family reported the change. The caseworker noted it. Meetings were held. Experts consulted. And through it all, Wren sat in silence and waited with the patience of someone who had waited 279 days for a single person to look up. She knew what she was doing. She had learned from Russell that systems respond to crises. And she had learned from Dalton that sometimes you have to stop playing by the rules to get the right outcome. So she created a crisis the only way she could, by disappearing inside herself until the people with clipboards and file folders had no choice but to listen. The hearing was held on a Tuesday in November. Family court. Judge Edith Thornton, 61 years old, 30 years on the bench, a reputation for decisions that prioritized evidence over emotion. Dalton sat at the respondent's table in a suit that didn't fit him right. His tattoos disappeared beneath the sleeves that were slightly too short. His beard was trimmed. His hands rested on the table steady. The state's attorney presented the case against placement. Criminal history, organizational affiliations, substance abuse, risk factors. Each point delivered with the clinical precision of a system protecting itself from liability. Dalton's attorney presented the counter. 20 years since the conviction, clean records since. The rescue itself, the hospital visits, the testimony of doctors and nurses and therapists who had watched Dalton sit in a plastic chair every day for 3 months and let a broken child heal at her own pace. Then the judge asked to hear from Wren. She walked to the front of the courtroom, 79 pounds now, still thin but no longer skeletal. Her hair was cut short and clean. She wore a blue dress and shoes that fit. She sat in the witness chair and looked at Judge Thornton with the same steady gaze she'd fixed on Sergeant Caldwell, on the paramedics, on every adult who had entered her life since the door opened. Wren, the judge said, can you tell me what you'd like? Silence. The courtroom waited. The caseworker shifted in her seat. Then Wren spoke. 279 days. Her voice was clear, quiet but carrying the way sound carries in a room where everyone has stopped breathing. That's how long I was in that room. I counted every day. I scratched the wall because it was the only thing I controlled. I stood at the window because it was the only way to ask for help. She paused. The system was supposed to protect me. 9 people called to say something was wrong. 9 times the file was closed. Nobody came. She looked at the state's attorney, not with anger, with something worse, clarity. 1 person came, not a police officer, not a social worker, not anyone the system sent. A delivery driver who looked up at a window because he knew what it was like to be the kid nobody sees. She turned to Dalton. His jaw was clamped tight. His eyes burned. He came back 5 times. He called the hotline and they told him the case was closed. He got threatened by the man who locked me up. And he still came back. Her voice didn't waver. He brought 163 people to stand in front of that house because the system wouldn't send one. She turned back to the judge. I know he has a record. I know he went to prison. I know he was in a motorcycle club. I know he lost his daughter and his wife and spent a year trying to drink himself to death. Each fact laid down like a card on a table. I also know he poured the bottle out the night he decided to save me. I know he sat in my hospital room every single day for 3 months. I know he never once told me what to feel or when to feel it. The courtroom was absolutely still. The system wants to protect me by putting me back into the same system that left me in a locked room for 279 days. That system had 9 chances, and it failed every single time. She paused, let the weight settle. He had 1 chance, and he didn't fail. Wren folded her hands in her lap. I'd like to go home with him. Please. Judge Thornton looked at Wren for a long moment, then at Dalton, then at the state's attorney, then back at the girl who had survived what no child should endure and who had walked into a courtroom and spoken with a precision that most adults would never achieve. This child has been failed by every institution designed to protect her. The judge's voice carried the weight of 30 years on the bench. Every system, every protocol, every safety net, all of them failed. All except one man who saw a face in a window and refused to look away. She paused. I'm not going to separate them now. Adoption approved. 5 years later, the chamber fell silent. Wren Ashford stood at a podium in the United States Capitol. 14 years old, tall for her age, clear eyes that carried the memory of a locked room without being imprisoned by it. A voice that had once been silent for 9 months and now filled a chamber where laws were made. Behind her sat Dalton Skaggs, leather vest back on his shoulders, the Steel Legion patch restored 4 years ago, when the Brotherhood voted unanimously to welcome him home. Not as president, he'd turned that down. As something quieter. Founder of Eyes on the Road, a program that had trained 320,000 delivery drivers, postal workers, and transportation employees to recognize signs of child abuse, to look in windows, to read signals children send when they cannot scream, to report what they see even when the system says nothing is wrong. 247 children found in 5 years. 247 lives pulled from locked rooms and hidden basements in silent houses where doors stayed shut and curtains stayed drawn. Wren gripped the podium, looked out at senators and representatives and cameras. 5 years ago, I was invisible. The chamber held its breath. Not because I wasn't there. I was there every day, standing at a window in Pine Ridge, Texas, scratching marks on a wall to count the days, breathing messages on glass, hoping someone would see them before they faded. She let the silence stretch the way she'd learned silence could speak. 279 days, that's how long was held in a room with a locked door by a man the state trusted with children's lives. He was a deputy district attorney, church-going, respected, connected. And the system that should have protected me handed him 9 chances to be stopped and closed the file every single time. She turned a page of notes she barely glanced at. I am standing here because of one man, not a police officer, not a social worker, not a politician, a delivery driver named Dalton Skaggs who brought food to my house 5 times and looked up at the window every single time. She looked back at Dalton. He sat with his massive hands folded, beard trimmed shorter now, tattoos visible beneath rolled sleeves. His eyes were steady on hers. Mr. Skaggs saw me. He read the words I mouthed through glass. He noticed when I wrote "help me out" with my breath on a window. And he did something almost nobody else was willing to do. Her voice rang through the chamber. He believed his own eyes instead of the official story. She turned back to the audience. The bill before Congress today is Wren's Law. It requires visual confirmation of homeschooled children every 30 days. It mandates in-person follow-up for all child welfare complaints within 72 hours, regardless of pandemic or staffing conditions. It creates criminal penalties for officials who close cases without proper investigation. She paused. But more than that, this law sends a message. Children are not invisible. When a 9-year-old girl mouths "call 911" through a window, someone will see her, someone will believe her, someone will come. Her voice dropped, somehow more powerful in its quiet. I stood at that window 279 days because I believed one thing. She looked directly into the nearest camera. Somebody will see me. The echo line landed in the silence. Be that somebody. Look up, pass Wren's law, and make sure no child ever has to scratch 279 days into a wall waiting for the world to notice they exist. She stepped back, turned to Dalton. 14 years old, standing in the most powerful room in America, and she mouthed three words that only a man who had learned to read lips in a prison cell could decode from across a chamber. Thank you, Dad. The applause began slowly, building, rising, until the entire chamber was on its feet and senators wiped their eyes and representatives who had seen everything stood shaken by a girl who had survived the unsurvivable and turned her silence into the loudest voice in the room. The sun was setting over Austin when Dalton pulled his motorcycle into the driveway. Modest house, nothing fancy, solid, two rocking chairs on the porch worn from use. A basketball hoop in the driveway net frayed from years of practice shots that missed and practice shots that didn't. Wren was already home. He could see her through the kitchen window, probably homework. Or one of the elaborate meals she'd taught herself to cook because she could eat whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, and the freedom of that still hadn't stopped being miraculous even after 4 years. He cut the engine and sat for a moment. On his back beneath the leather vest, a tattoo stretched across his shoulders. Two names connected by an infinity symbol. Colby, infinity, Wren, his daughter who had died, and his daughter who had lived. One taught him how to love without reservation. The other taught him how to live without giving up. The front door opened. Wren stood backlit by the warm glow from inside. Jeans and a t-shirt that said, Eyes on the Road. The program logo printed on the front, and I looking through a window with rays of light spreading outward. You're late. Testimony ran long. Politicians love hearing themselves talk. She rolled her eyes with the expertise of a teenager who had perfected the art. Did they pass it? Committee voted yes. 17-4. Full floor vote next week. Your speech tipped it. A grin broke across her face. Real, full, unafraid. The kind of smile that reaches the eyes because the eyes have nothing left to hide. I told them about you, about Colby, the bottle. Is that okay? Yeah, that's okay. I also said something else. She bit her lip, suddenly younger. I called you Dad, in front of everyone. It just came out. Dalton stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, throat tight, eyes burning. I heard. Are you mad? He climbed the steps, closed the distance, pulled her into a hug that said everything words had never been adequate to carry. The arms that had gripped a rusted porch railing and looked up at a dirty window now held the girl who had been behind it. Alive, growing, unbroken in all the ways that mattered. I'm the opposite of mad, the opposite of everything I was 5 years ago. They stood there, father and daughter, on a porch in Austin as sunset painted the sky in shades of copper and gold. Inside the house in Wren's room, a section of wall had been carefully replastered and then marked again. 279 new scratches, same groups of 5, same neat rows, but each one was labeled, not with the number of a day survived, but with the name of a day lived. Day 1, saw the sky without glass. Day 7, ate strawberry ice cream. Day 30, slept without screaming. Day 84, adoption hearing. He didn't fail. Day 279, said Dad for the first time. Beneath the scratches in her handwriting, in letters carved carefully with a pen, instead of a penny, 3 lines. You saw me when the whole world looked away. You heard my silence. Somebody will see me. Somebody did. Dalton looked through the open door at the warm light inside their house. At the kitchen where drawings were taped to the refrigerator, the way Nora had once taped Wren's art to a different refrigerator in a different life. At the hallway where framed photographs showed a girl growing stronger, month by month, year by year. At the window clean and curtains pulled wide, letting the last of the daylight pour in. No locked doors, no covered windows, no silence forced upon a child who had learned to scream without sound. Know what I was thinking on the ride home, he said. What? That first delivery, pizza getting cold, standing on that cracked porch about to walk away. He smiled. Then I looked up. And I saw you. And I saw you. Wren took his hand. Best thing you ever did, she said. Best thing I ever did was the easiest decision I ever made. I just looked up. Wren pulled him toward the door. Best thing I ever did was standing at that window. even when it hurt, even when nobody came, even when I stopped believing anyone would. Her voice was steady, certain. The voice of a girl who had counted 279 days on a wall and discovered the count didn't have to end in darkness. I kept standing there because you never know which time will be the time someone finally sees you. They walked into the house together, the door closed behind them. The porch light came on, casting a warm glow across the rocking chairs and the worn steps and the quiet street where the last light of day was fading into the kind of darkness that doesn't frighten you when you know someone is waiting inside. And somewhere in America at this very moment, a child stood at a window, watching, waiting, pressing fingertips against cold glass, mouthing words no one had read yet, hoping that somewhere out there someone would look up. One person can change everything. One delivery driver who reads lips. One phone call at midnight. One army assembled in 9 hours. One girl pulled from a locked room on day 279. One law passed in her name. 247 children found because a broken man chose to see instead of look away. This is how the world changes. Not in grand gestures from powerful people, but in single moments of courage from ordinary ones. In the decision to believe your own eyes. In the refusal to let one more child disappear behind glass. Ren Ashford learned that from a window. Dalton Skaggs learned it from a porch. And somewhere between the two of them, in the 20 feet of air, in the pane of dirty glass that separated a girl's silence from a man's grief, something happened that neither of them could have accomplished alone. They saved each other. And it started the way everything starts, with someone choosing to look up.